Welcome to Skywatchers Radio, Robert and Betty Luca. It's a pleasure to have you on here.
Oh, thank you so much for having us on.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Now, that was a brief summary
Short
of
synopsis.
your story. Yeah, a summary of your story. I want you really to tell the audience listening in the details of this, because it is an amazing abduction scenario, abduction story.
I think Bob should really start with what's going on.
When did this start, Bob?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
When was this first started for you folks?
Okay, well, I'm going to go back even further. Actually, this all started for me in 1944. Okay, I was a child. It was during the war. I was living with my grandmother and my mom. My dad was overseas. I saw a light in the sky that came closer and closer to where I was on my swing set in the backyard. It turned out to be a craft which stopped above and to the left of my swing set. It emitted a very thin beam of white light, about the thickness of a pencil lead, which struck me in the forehead. I couldn't move. The craft, as it tilted, it had a domed glass top, and I could see what I call two little people inside at the time. Now, they gave me a message mentally, and they said they were preparing something that was going to be good for mankind, and that they had visited many, many people like myself who would meet in the future and not be fearful. That was the very first experience I had. There was residue left after the thing had left, because they stopped. It was over a victory garden, and for years nothing would grow there. Okay, we move up to 1967. I was on my way to the beach, a beautiful, clear summer day. I go by an area known as the Trap Rock, and there's 5 men working on a railroad spur that went into that trap rock. They're looking up in the air, so I look up, and I see 2 huge cylinder-shaped objects that look like brightly polished chrome reflecting sunlight. I knew they were not aircraft immediately, because there were no wings, no tail section, no exhaust, and no noise. I pulled my car over. I watched as from where I was, they were headed toward New Haven, Connecticut. I watched, and a few minutes went by, and 2 smaller objects dropped out of the belly, the center of these objects. One went toward New Haven, one went in the other direction. Okay. When they were out of sight, I resumed my trip to the beach. I got a couple miles down the road, very rural area, no houses. One of these craft came back. It stopped on the left-hand side of the road. It stopped several feet above the ground, and this is all conscious memory. Next thing I know, there's a blinding red light, something you could compare to like a ruby rod laser, very intense red light, and somehow I was inside that thing. I don't know actually what the process was, but I ended up inside. There were your typical gray beings inside. They had on red uniforms, and there was a lightning bolt emblem on the left chest. I was put on a table, given a physical exam of sorts. They took skin samples, nail samples. They scanned me with something like an X-ray machine. They took sperm, and not in a very pleasant manner. Next thing I know, I'm in my car. I get to the beach, which was about a half-hour ride, and 2.5 to 3 hours had passed. So for years, I never knew where that time went. 1977, 10 years later, I met Betty.
So, real quick, not to cut you off before you continue. So, you had no conscious memory of that part of the abduction?
Not yet. I remembered everything up to the red light.
Okay.
And that's where the rest came out under hypnosis with MUFON. 10 years later, I met Betty. Now, at the time that happened, I only told my parents and my best friend, because I didn't want to end up in a mental institution. I thought Betty would be somebody I could talk to, so I had completed a trip around the country with a friend of mine, and we were coming home across the northern tier of the country, and all of a sudden we just decided at a rest area of going to Florida, which is several thousand miles out of our way. We got to Florida, meet my friend's sister-in-law who lived there. She told me about a woman she worked with that had had a UFO experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I have to talk to her because I've kept this inside for so long. And it bothered me that part of my life was missing. I went down to talk to Betty. She wouldn't talk to me because Raymond Fowler told her beware of reporters and whatnot. So I finally convinced her to have lunch the next day and that I was not a reporter. And from that time forward, I've been buying her lunch. Now, everyone
it turned
knows,
out it turned out pretty well for you, though.
Yeah, it did. Now, a lot of people are aware of her story, but what happened was, once the first book came out which was almost totally about her experiences, the government unleashed on us. And when I say unleashed, we had 3 or 4 IRS audits in a row. Our telephone was tapped. Black unmarked helicopters overflew our house on a regular basis, and they showed up anywhere we went. They knew where we were. It didn't matter if we were in New Hampshire, Connecticut, Florida. They would show up. And our mail, any mail we got from out of the country was open. I did complain to the postmaster about that. So, and we were followed by cars that the license plates came back as unregistered. I gave the license plate numbers to Police Lieutenant Larry Fawcett, who was also a UFO investigator. And they came back as unissued plates. So, this is government interference. The FBI, when they showed up at my job, Betty and I had left in the middle of the night, went to Florida, didn't tell anybody, so they lost track of us. When we got back, the people at work told me what happened, so Betty and I went to the FBI office, and they said they could neither confirm nor deny that it was them, but obviously they had photo ID, and the people that I work with had confirmed in writing that it was FBI people that were there. While we were there, I said, hey, why are you guys tapping our telephone? And they said, well, in your case, it's not us, it's Air Force intelligence.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So
well, did you get that in writing?
Yeah, they don't put too much in writing.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I tell you, we did have some fun with this because, Betty and I were not going to be intimidated. I called the CIA. I told them that we were doing a book on UFOs and I wanted an interview. They refused. I challenged the FBI to debate us on television, not about what happened to us, but about their own documents that I had in my possession. They would not. The administrator of NASA literally ran out of his office on us when we appeared there and asked for an interview because we were doing a book. And we were told at the guard station to walk down to where his office was, which was quite a walk from where we were. We got there, and he was in. We got there. We were told we would be granted an interview. We were met at the door by a visibly nervous secretary who said he was no longer in. I had called the Pentagon many times to try to find out whose helicopters were overflying our house.
What answers would they give you? I mean, it kept happening over and over again.
Finally, they told me nobody there would talk to me. Now, the thing is, I recorded all these conversations. I still have them to this day on tape. But we had a little fun with this because these helicopters that would come over so low. I mean, the windows in the house would vibrate. Some of the neighbors actually documented the times of the flights and all. And
did you video record any of these helicopters flying by?
We did not have a video camera then. This was back in 1980.
Oh, man.
85.
They were really expensive back then.
I do have hundreds of pictures.
Okay.
And I put several of them on our website, Andreassonaffair.com. And also people can see the documents there, the conversations I've had with the government. What they did, I actually caught the United States Navy Space Weapons Division hacking into my computer. 48 hours later, the Army hacked into my computer. I had been a computer technician for Gateway. I had very good security, and I caught them red-handed, so to speak, with their hand in the cookie jar. So I wrote to the Navy and the Army, asked them why they were hacking my computer. I got a response from the Army Inspector General admitting that these were, in fact, Department of Defense computers, one belonging to the Navy, the other to the Army. Said they'd do an investigation, and they never did. So I filed Freedom of Information Act request to get the information.
How'd you track their IP address? That's how you got them?
Yeah, IP address, and then you go to who's who and or who is. And, right. I got I got the street address, the computer ID, the operator number. I mean, the fact that it was the Department of Defense computers. So I had all the information I needed. So I thought, well, nothing happened. So I went to my state senator. This is sometime later, and I asked him to pass these Freedom of Information Act requests on my behalf. He did. The story came back now, we can't find the documents, just like the IRS. Okay, you can't find the documents. So then I went to the United States Attorney General, and I said, this is a crime. I want this investigated by your office. And they wrote me back, and, this is a federal crime, so it has to be investigated by the FBI. So I just recently wrote the FBI, and I haven't heard anything yet. I sent them, of course, all the mail I send to these people, I send certified with a return receipt. So we're waiting to hear, if the FBI is going to do anything, because it's a federal crime. I have an admission from the Department of Defense that it was their computers.
Now, did you get the ranking officer who spoke to you and his name and rank and everything?
Oh yeah, it was the Inspector General.
Oh, wow, yeah. That's pretty
and it's a signed document. So, no problem there. But as I started to tell you, Betty and I we weren't going to be beat down and ridiculed and stuff like that. So one of the things that happened when we lived in Cheshire, I had a friend that was in the military, and he built me an exact replica of a surface-to-air missile. So
okay.
I said, we're going to have a little fun with these guys. Now, I had flown over the house myself. At that time, I was taking lessons for my pilot's license, so I knew what they could see. And little time passed, and sure enough, here we hear the typical blades of a Huey UH-1 helicopter coming from the north side of our house. Well, I knew he was low, and I knew how long it would be before he could see into the backyard. So we took this missile out, and we set it up on a cement pad in the back, and it was an exact replica. That guy came over, cleared the roof, and all of a sudden we were looking, that helicopter pulled into a very sharp right-hand turn, an evasive maneuver. I mean, I thought he was going to pull the blades off the thing. So he was looking at our yard, there's no doubt now. And I told Betty, I said, I bet you this guy's headed back for a shower and a change of clothing.
Definitely change of drawers.
Yeah, but hang on. How many people happen to just by chance have a surface-to-air missile lying around in their backyard? I mean, Seriously. There's only so many things you can buy on eBay. I mean, come on, really?
Maybe that's why they're watching.
Well, the other thing that made them nervous was when I looked at them through the scope of my 30-06. They also didn't like that too much. Now, I have nothing against the guys that are flying these helicopters because they're doing what they were ordered to.
Right, doing their job.
I used to give them a single finger wave when they went over, things like that, but just to let them know that, I knew what they were up to. But on some occasions, one time we were up in Massachusetts on Route 2, very rural area. 2 of them came up from a field and passed over the front of my car at like 50 feet. And if you don't think that's intimidating, it is. Now,
that's scary more than anything else.
It is.
Well, there's no doubt this was for intimidation because Betty and I were doing a lecture in Phoenix, Arizona, and a man, obviously military, approached me during a break. And he had, crew cut, short hair, shirt straight, button straight down the front to the center of his belt buckle, sharply creased pants, highly polished black shoes. And he said to me, we're only sending the helicopters so we don't have to hurt you. But, oh, okay, thank you. On another occasion, Betty and I were...
well, you're just going to give me a heart attack from all the helicopters because that's scary in itself.
Well, I'm too stupid to get scared. What can I tell you? Betty and I were at MIT doing a lecture there, and Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was the spokesman for Project Blue Book before he left and opened the Center for UFO Studies, rushed over to Betty during a break, didn't have a conversation with her, but told her right out, he said, stick to philosophy and leave the military out of this. So that was another warning. And then we had some kooky phone calls, people threaten to beat you, stuff like that. I recorded those too, but that never bothered us. But anyway, what brought this all about was Betty is an excellent amateur artist. When she did the hypnosis for MUFON and all, she had seen the inside of the craft. She had seen the propulsion system, and she drew the propulsion system and also diagrams of everything that she did see and experience.
Yeah,
right.
Actually, I want to interject here for a second, because Betty's story is a little bit different from your story, Robert. And the type of beings that you saw, Betty, were, in fact, one was described as beings of light, correct?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I saw that too, as well as she did. But when the tall beings, the ones you mentioned in the beginning, when they told me you do not die, that was an experience when both of us were taken together out of our home. But I'm going to let Betty tell you how this started in 1967, which was her main adult encounter, and that's what got the ball rolling, because that's what the book was about in the beginning.
Yeah, that was the Andreasson Affair. It's out there right now for people to look into it. They may be able to purchase it or go to the library. They may have them there. But it was in 1967, and what happened was my ex-husband had an accident. He was in the hospital, and my mother and father came to stay with me to help out with my 7 children and I. And it was evening, and we were all sitting in the living room when suddenly the television went off, the lights went out, and we saw a reddish-orange light coming through the pantry window. And immediately my father and I thought, uh-oh, either the police or the fire department were out there. So unknown to me, my father had rushed past me and gone into the pantry area. And the thing is, the pantry area was a little bit separated. There was a half wall there. So I couldn't actually see where he was, but he was at that wall, at the window, looking out to the side. And actually, he was the first to see the beings coming down the hill. And he described them as if they were children dressed up in costumes, moon man costumes, hopping down the hill. And it was at that point, I wasn't aware my father was over there. The next thing I knew, there would be 5 beings entering my home right through the door in the kitchen, and they were talking to me through the mind. And at first I was frightened, but I read the Word of God, and the scripture, entertain the strangers, for it may be angels unaware, came into my mind, and all of a sudden I felt peace and love present. And it seemed as if they wanted something, and I thought it was food, but it turned out not to be that. They wanted knowledge tried by fire, and the only thing I could think of was the Bible. It's been around forever, so we went into the living room, and there was an exchange of books at that time. My mother and the children were all sitting on the couch, and I was kind of concerned because they were in a state of suspended animation. The being who said his name was Quasga raised my daughter Becky out of that suspended state. She couldn't move very much, but she did see what was going on, because I handed him the Bible, and in turn he put his hand over it, and 3 other smaller Bibles or books appeared. He passed them to the 3 that were beside him. They were consuming whatever it was. It was the pages went by one after another, and they were white light, and you could tell that they were consuming the information from it,
right.
With their eyes. And at that particular point,
like a form of speed reading, or just it was different type of data.
It was the pages were just turning all on their own.
Oh my, okay.
They were light, and it seemed as if they were consuming whatever that information of light was in it. Because, angels want to know what the Father God is up to. They don't have all the information that people might think they have, and even the Word of God says that.
Yeah, but if they're reading the Bible, the information that they're getting might be a little out of date for current times.
Right. That's true, and that's why the only thing is, I think that they would probably know all the different scriptures, once they consume the Word, and
right. I mean, you would figure they're angels; they would know this information already.
Right. Well, no, there are different levels of angels, and these were like Gray Watchers, the Watchers, and I'll explain what they looked like. They had large bulbous heads with dark black eyes, and they wore a blue suit, and had a belt and a sash across its chest, and there was an emblem on one of the arms. It looked like a bird, and they wore boots. But that's what they looked like. Why I felt they were angels is because of the scripture that went into my mind, and I know that God was watching over me and my family anyway, and believe it today. And so anyways, what happened was there was exchange of a thin, I passed the Bibles to him, and he passed them to the three with him. And then he had a thin blue book that he passed me, and he said it was an initiation, and that I was supposed to look at all the pages and grasp as much information as I possibly could from it. There was strange writings, and there were drawings of pictures of, I think part of the craft was also involved there. But anyways, that's what had happened. After that, I put the book down on the counter, and we left the living room. My daughter was put back in a state of suspended animation with the rest of my family. We went into the kitchen, and we went out the door, right through the wooden door. We did not open it, just went right through, and we went around to the side, and there was the craft in the back, just sitting there. And the leader, Quasgar, just waved his hand, and underneath became transparent, or the shell became transparent, and I could see what the craft looked like. There were the huge crystal balls on the end with these metal armatures with a crystal ball on top and a crystal wheel that went around a tube. And they had told me also when I was aboard the craft that they used mercury and a gel in order to for their flight. And today I believe there is something like that being done.
Yeah, they're experimenting with rotating liquid mercury in an enclosed tube at high RPMs, like around 50, 60,000 RPM, and supposedly it negates about 89% of the effect of gravity.
I've heard that theory as well, and I don't know if there's some truth to it or not, but high speed, using the mercury fluid at a high speed. I've heard of that before.
Well, the strange thing is just recently my daughter was wondering about the old house in South Ashburnham where the cellar door was located outside. Both her and her brother were talking about it. And after she continued to talk about as they were kids, and they found mercury over in by the cement wall that was attached to the regular garage, and they were playing with it. She said that they were swishing it back and forth in their hands. When I heard of that, I thought, oh my word, they're being poisoned, But the children were all right. She spoke to her brothers and sisters, and they also remembered doing the same thing. So how that ever got there, I don't know, unless the craft had hovered over there because it was dark in that area, had hovered there until something either leaked or they released some of that mercury. I don't know, but it's a strange place to find mercury anyway.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so it was only a short distance to very short distance to where the house was in the backyard where the craft landed.
There's one thing I'd like to interject here, too. Ben Rich, who was the head of Skunk Works, where some of our most exotic weapons and aircraft come from, said before he retired, he made a statement that we have the technology today to bring ET home. And when you look at that, along with statements made by Herman Oberth, who was the head of the Nazi rocket program, when after the war he was asked how they had such advanced technology, he publicly stated that, he said, we had help. And when they said help from who, he said help from the people from other worlds. And then you got people like Warner von Braun, Gordon Cooper, President Carter, President Reagan. I mean, the technology available right now is far beyond what the average public is aware of, and a lot of it did come from UFO craft that have been back engineered. It's just that the government is not going to tell us because the people in power want to stay in power. And if tomorrow we didn't need oil anymore or the electric company anymore, it would be a problem for them, those that are in power.
Do you really think that is the main reason? I think there's even more sinister reasons than just the free energy.
Sinister, yeah.
Let me give you a quick example. When I was in Florida, I worked for a company. I was a hydrogen fuel cell research technician. This company developed a unit you could put in your home, and it made heat, hot water, and electricity. It was ready to go into production. It had been thoroughly tested. Okay? Along comes the oil companies, and boom, we all get a mass layoff and have to sign confidentiality agreements. Now, the interesting thing is, this was in 2001 or the beginning of 2002. You cannot find those anywhere in the United States, but there are over 100,000 similar units in use right now in Japan that have been produced by a Japanese company. They're very similar to what we were working on. Now, if everybody put those in their home and you didn't need to buy oil anymore to heat your house in the winter and you could disconnect from the power companies, a lot of people would be out of money and power. And
that's definitely true. Yeah, that's true.
That's just a small example. So you can imagine if we got the kind of power or energy that the UFOs are using, those that are in power today wouldn't be in power tomorrow.
Yeah, but you'd figure that
wishful thinking.
Yeah, but you'd also figure that with that kind of technology, the powers that be would find a way to regulate it, tax it, and make money off of it. There always will be a platform that's going to be needed to put some other form of energy out there for people to consume and use, whether it is electric, wind power, solar power, anything UFO related that we back engineered. There still has to be a platform set up by individuals to make that accessible for the rest of the planet. So I'm pretty sure they'll figure out a way to make money off of it. I mean, this is the United States government. We make money off of water. Like, think about this, for example. Somebody had a bright idea 30, 40 years ago, whatever it was, 30 years ago, to put water in a bottle and sell it. I mean, the most abundant resource on the planet.
I got to interrupt you on that one. I'm sorry. I just read an article not 2 days ago talking about California's water shortages. But the Nestle plant that bottles the water for the Nestle branded products, do you know that they only pay for every 430 gallons 67 cents?
I believe it. And then they charge you $1.
Oh, boy.
And
then they charge you $1, not per gallon, but
for a little bottle of water.
Exactly.
It's a huge industry, but the point is that somebody had that bright idea. Let's charge them for water, the number one resource on the planet that it's free. Let's charge it for them.
Do you know what the two most expensive liquids are on the planet?
What's that?
Honey, by the gallon.
Oh, by the
water.
gallon,
yeah.
And water. Those are the two most expensive liquids in the world.
And the water is going to get more expensive as time goes
it's going to be water. The next major war is going to be over water. Has to be.
Yeah. I
I
can see that happening.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, though, like if somebody developed what Tesla had in mind, where you can't meter it, that would kind of mess them up a bit.
Well, actually, they are working on similar technology to what Tesla was working on at the end there. You know, wireless power, which is basically wireless electricity, is what he was working on. There are companies working on that still today. Obviously, it's hard technology to master, but there are now phones that you could wirelessly charge them. So, I mean, the technology is almost there.
Well, no, don't forget, you can wirelessly charge them, but you got to put it on the transfer plate. That's right, smack.
Right, but there's no wires. You're still charging, a different form. So I mean, the technology is getting there. That's the point. But I mean, can you imagine that kind of technology? That would be an amazing way to get off of fossil fuels and whatnot.
Sure. Well, all the electricity comes from a rotating magnetic field, and that's what the Earth is.
Yeah.
So we just have to figure out how to tap it.
That's basic. That's the basic gist of it. Yeah, no, that's it right there. If it was only that simple to actually do.
Well, Tesla lit up a whole bunch of light bulbs 25 miles from his transformer in Colorado without any wires.
It's a shame the way Tesla ended, considering the fact that we have everything we have today in part thanks to Tesla.
Absolutely.
I mean, if it wasn't for him, electricity wouldn't be here, lights wouldn't be here, the internet would never exist. A lot of these things that we take for granted is all thanks to him. He's really I think the greatest inventor that ever lived, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, getting back to what I didn't mean to interrupt her, Betty. I was just trying to bring forth what would happen if that technology, and as I said, she had drawn everything she saw, even the propulsion system. And one other thing I'll mention here, one of our residences was broken into when we were gone, and there was inside, some cash, computers, cameras, firearms. All that was taken was some drawings of the internal part of the craft that she had drawn. And I had to call the state police because we were in a rural area, and they filled out a report. I told the trooper that we were heavily involved in the UFO phenomena, that I believed it was a government agency. And he said, look, if I find anything out, I will tell you no matter what.
They never called her?
No, a week later I went down to his office, and he had been transferred, and the person that was there, the trooper that replaced him, said he didn't know where he'd been transferred to.
Which happens often.
And that also happened to me with an FAA agent that drove all the way down from Boston to our home to look into the black helicopter situation. He got transferred between the weekend and Tuesday. So
wow. So if anything happens to me and Alan here, we know why.
Yeah, there you go.
Because we had Robert and Betty on the show. Listen, we got to hit commercial break.
It was great
here.
knowing you. You'll see me on another show at another time slot with someone else and a totally different name. That's right, host.
Yes, and I'll be somewhere in a cave just screaming and crying while the little Grays are trying to get me.
Hey, they got bunker busters to find you there.
You do believe that they're now tapping your computers and all sorts of stuff. As I mentioned off air, how much do you think this would kind of connect to the Mirage Men movie and what was happening with Paul Benowitz and Richard Doughty? I know there was, your case spanned, so many years that everyone right through that era also. Do you think there's an exercise by the government to go after and harass a bunch of people like yourselves and Paul Benowitz?
Oh, they want to harass people. They want to ridicule you. But the difference is we don't bend to that stuff, because we started to investigate the government. And as I said, the CIA backed down from an interview with us. The FBI refused to do a TV show with us on their own documents, and they didn't like that. And then one of the helicopters that I took a photo of over our house, I sent it to Kodak, and I had it blown up to 20 by 40. I didn't get it back. I sent it to Kodak in Boston. I got it back 6 weeks later with a Washington, D.C. postmark, and I put it on network television, and the flight stopped for about between 7 to 10 days. But then they resumed again. So, see, they don't like it when you push back. You're supposed to just lay down for them and let it go. But that's not our nature, fortunately, or unfortunately for them.
And I think also the government had something involved with movie rights, because we were approached by a number of people wanting to do the movie. However,
Universal.
Universal Studio had bought the rights to it, and they shelved it. And now they're saying they want $1 million.
Yep, to buy the rights back.
Wow, are you serious? So they want you to pay them $1 million?
They invested about $200,000 or so to buy it, and now they want $1 million to purchase it back when it's been sitting on their shelf dormant for 30 years or whatever.
So hold on. So you don't even have the right to make the film because they bought the rights.
Right.
Yeah, and they think they own all the rest of the books because they're calling them characters.
Wow.
There's 5 books out there. Right now, Bob and I are writing a book together, and because after the 5 books, I've had another experience with the one. And I figure, well, the world must want to know about the information because what was told to me, I've chosen you to show the world. And so I feel obligated to get that information out. And Bob and I really don't have all that much to say, but so what we figured we'll do, we'll tell a little bit about our life and a little summary of each encounter we have had. And that is how the book will be. And we've named it Lifting the Veil.
That's a great name.
Thank you.
That is a great name. It reminds me of Art Bell back in the 90s when he would talk about the veil dropping in this entire field and the paranormal in general. Lifting the veil.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. I like that.
I like it. It's terrible that you don't have the rights to make the film yourselves or find your own studio. That's horrible. But look, following what happened to Travis Walton in his film, maybe it's a good thing because Hollywood tends to butcher reality when they make these movies.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if one was ever done, we would want it done accurately, because the story itself, there's just so much to it. People have a right to know that this stuff is going on.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that we're doing what we're doing is because a lot of people are fearful if they have an experience, or they're afraid to talk about it because the government has done what it's done. So we would just like people to know, don't feel afraid, don't feel alone. You're not crazy if you have one of these experiences.
Right.
So that they'll know that they have someone to look, another story to look at, or other people are having these things happen. So that they don't have to be so worried about it.
Now, Robert, I'm being asked here on Facebook if you or Betty have ever taken polygraph tests like Travis has
before the
to confirm this.
Before the book was ever done, Betty was subjected to PSE stress evaluation test, psychological evaluation, psychiatric evaluation, background investigations, all of that.
A whole bunch of stuff.
And how did what was the results in some of these? Did you get any inconclusive results, or
no?
Was it passing?
No, it was all positive. Matter of fact, the psychiatrist came to visit us, I think a couple years after the initial exam. He was in the area, so he wanted to stop in at our house and visit. He came down, we met him about 9 o'clock at night, and he ended up staying till 5:30 in the morning. And while he said he would trust Betty as much as he would trust the president with what she was saying. And the other thing, while he was there, fortunately, he himself witnessed a couple of paranormal occurrences. While we were in the living room, about 11:30, 12, or midnight, there was a very loud crash in the kitchen. Now, there was just the 3 of us in the house. We all went out to look. There was nothing moved, nothing disturbed, and so that's something he witnessed himself. Then when he was going home in the morning, we were standing out in the yard. It was about 5:30, 5:45. It was just starting to get light, and there was a huge cigar-shaped cloud that stopped in the area of our house, almost over it. It had to be, judging by the length of a drag strip, I'd say close to a quarter mile long, and it was very thick in the center, and toward the edges,
like cloud.
You could see through stars just a little bit through the edges.
With the mist.
So we were standing there talking, and finally he looked at me. He said, "Did you see that?" I said, "Yeah, but I wasn't going to say anything until you saw it first."
But he had high credentials.
Yeah, he was an MD, a psychiatrist. He had a degree in aeronautical engineering. So he's a pretty good guy. And all of the investigators, I mean, there were physicists, aeronautical engineers, communications specialists. Ray Fowler, the author, had been with the Air Force and the National Security Agency. I mean, all these people were highly qualified. So we don't have any problem answering questions on anything.
No, the fact that they're highly qualified individuals, I mean, that I can't, again, this lends to the credibility of the case. I mean, this has to be something you could use to show credibility. Could people access some of the data that was, collected in some of the investigations with you guys?
Well,
is that all stuff in the books, or?
There's quite a bit of it in the books. All the different questions that were asked and the answers that came forward.
There was so much information over a period of years. There's 5 different books that Ray Fowler did, and the investigation lasted for years. The police officer, Larry Fawcett, he came into the case believing that we were putting forth a hoax. And he told Ray Fowler, he says, if I detect that this is a hoax, he said, I'm going to make it public. So he would question us. He'd stop at the house and visit. He'd call up at all hours, and he'd question, and finally he figured out for himself, well, everything's consistent. And after a couple of years, he said, this is genuine. This happened. He couldn't break anything in the story or the consistency.
Right.
There was also some supporting evidence, like I mentioned, where the thing took place when I was a child. There's an area in that Victory Garden would never grow again. Now, that coupled with when I was interviewed by MUFON, they brought in a psychic that was well known that had...
Wait a minute. MUFON brought in a psychic?
Yeah, the investigators.
It could happen.
Okay.
The woman, this is a very credible person. She worked for the government to try to track Soviet submarines. Now remember, we're going back to the 80s. She worked with the state and local police on some cases. She does psychometry.
No, she was a psychic, or was she like a remote viewer type of psychic?
No, she's a psychic.
Okay, hardcore psychic.
She does psychometry. From my jackknife, now this is the first time I ever met this woman. She repeated the whole scenario as it happened when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
Not only that, she said, I see pipes and vines by a garage, and I thought, well, she's off on some things because there's no pipes or vines there. Later on, when I had talked to my own mother, she said, oh, yeah, your grandfather had put up a pipe arbor and there were grapevines out there. I didn't even know that. So, I mean, that's a little more confirmation for me.
That's pretty good details, yeah. That's pretty good detail.
And there were things that affected we haven't even got into. When we had an incident in our car where the compass, the car was parked facing due north. We had an experience that happened during the night. In the morning, the compass was pointing almost east, and the digital clock, which was set by the radio the day before, had gained 20 minutes. Now, electrical engineers I talked to said this can't happen, and said possibly by some type of electromagnetic pulse. On another occasion, Betty had an experience during the day where we were. There were 2 huge maple trees behind the RV. We were at a campground.
Hanging over.
And the leaves on the top of those maple trees had turned brown, but the bottom was still green. And we were able to get 2 electrical engineers to come in and take a look and get their thoughts. Also, the water pump in that RV had burned out, even though we were on campground water, and I had the switch taped in the off position so no one could hit it accidentally. It actually burned out the pump and melted the wires going to it. So there were different physical things that happened as well, and many of these things were witnessed by the investigators, by neighbors, by family. I mean, it's not just us saying these things are happening.
Right. Collaborative witnesses. Here's a question for you. At the end of the day, what is a conclusion the 2 of you are coming up with as to why this is happening to you? Have you given a solid reason why this keeps happening? The abduction scenario itself, the abduction.
Well, first off, it runs in family lines. Now, in
which
my
I've heard many times, yes.
In my case, my mother remembered seeing the inside of a craft, but she would never undergo hypnosis. She was scared to death of it. And I believe Betty's mother also had an experience with some strange
and
beings.
she was scared to death of it.
And I think because of what we saw or experienced or were told by these beings, this is why the government got so heavily involved. I'll tell you, I would love to have the money that the government spent keeping us under surveillance. It would be beautiful. We'd build a huge house and a pool
No
and all
kidding.
kinds of stuff.
You know how many homeless people can be fed and clothed and sheltered with that kind of money? Oh, jeez.
Unbelievable.
You can cure diseases
and the
probably
thing is,
with that kind of money.
if they had come to us like human beings and said, look, we're interested in what you saw or whatever, we would have sat down, talked to them, told them the whole bit.
Which begs the question, why do you think that is the case? Why do you think they didn't do that?
Well, because they've been saying for years that they don't investigate the phenomenon, that there's nothing to it, and it presents no threat to national security. So, now
yeah, but you're an individual. You and Betty are two individuals. If the government comes to you on a peaceful way and tell you, look, you got to keep this secret, but we're very interested in your case. We want to know more. We want to try to help. And they do it in that way. I mean, you're not going to go blabbering to the media. You're going to take it seriously.
But you got two words there that don't go together. It's government and help.
That's true.
That's where the problem is.
I saw that one coming, folks.
Yeah, I kind of walked right into that one.
We've learned from experience that just, as nice as it sounds, it just doesn't happen.
It's a great fairy tale, right? Like Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at Obamacare. That's great help.
Oh, my gosh.
Do we
really?
Listen, we got 15 minutes left. We don't want to go on that conversation there.
No, we don't know. What do you think the aliens think of Obamacare?
I don't know. I know that one thing they told Betty was that mankind is going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Now,
and it's
I could have told you that one, actually.
To lose all.
You know that Betty was a student of the Bible for years.
Mm-hmm.
I was totally opposite. All I wanted to do when I was younger is raise hell, build race cars and things like that. That's how we got behind some of the cars that were chasing us and got the license plate numbers. But
really, I thought you were running moonshine, but okay.
Well, I did that. I made some. A
few years ago.
I ran it, but I made some too. Yeah.
Well, that explains the whole entire situation that you've had. It was a little bit.
No.
It was a little bit more than that 80 proof, huh?
No, we've determined that moonshine causes Bigfoot. That's the difference.
The best you can get out of the still is 190 proof, and then you cut it from there.
I'm surprised no one's actually made a moonshine or a vodka that's 180 proof and just called it Abduction.
Yeah,
that's a great idea.
We live in an area now. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV show Moonshiners.
No, can't say I have.
Okay.
Well, I saw it once, yeah.
Well, we live in that area.
Yeah.
And there are, as a matter of fact, some property we purchased a couple years ago, I gave a police officer permission to hunt there, and he said, I asked him, you want a map? Oh, no, he says, I know the place. He says, we just knocked off a still before you bought the place.
It's like that show. It's like, hey, Bubba, look over there. There's a police officer looking for us, but he can't find us, even though this giant crew of filmmakers with the lights and everything to shine on so they could actually get on my good side, they can't see us.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like that Miami Towing Company. That Miami Towing Company show where you have all the irate customers coming in. How dare you? You lifted my Lamborghini. You took my. And I'm like, oh God, really?
Yeah.
It never happens.
Well,
like that.
it gets a lot of viewers, so it works for them.
All for the power of ratings.
Yeah,
exactly. But there are still a lot of stills in operation around the area where we live here.
Yeah.
But we don't
Robert,
talk about that.
Real quick, not to segue, but real quick, I wanted to ask you this. Being that you've been talking about this for a long time, and you've really have experienced a lot in the last 30, 40, 50 years. During the time now, have you seen a gradual change yourself with the way society is dealing with folks like yourself that are abductees or experiencers, aside from the government and the harassment that's been going on in that area, but the way that you're treated on a daily basis by friends, family, coworkers or trusted associates or people in general in the media or people like us that approach you to do shows and stuff? Has the atmosphere changed in the last few years?
Absolutely.
It's much better.
Absolutely. There's something like about 70, I believe it's 70 or 75% of people today believe that UFOs are real and do exist.
Right.
And I think it's something like 50% believe the government is lying to us.
Yeah. Even Podesta, who works with the president, believes in UFOs.
Right.
Yeah.
But years ago, like I said, when that first happened to me, I didn't tell anybody because I was worried that I'd get maybe put in an institution or sent to a psychiatrist or who knows. But
there was definitely a different stigma back then, wasn't it? Like you immediately thought, well, they're going to think I'm crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the government wanted. People. In fact, they had two people in the town near us selling books, claiming to be us, making ridiculous claims, and it wasn't us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's how far they went, trying to bring us down.
Yeah.
But
now, do you think these tactics are still going on with other folks? Because, this is a pretty extreme operation, and I'm going to call that from the government. What's happened to the both of you? This is a pretty extreme case of long-term harassment. Do you think there's a lot of other folks out there that are experiencing a similar situation that just have not come forward?
It may not be as obvious with the helicopters and stuff, but today the surveillance has gotten better. I mean, they can tap your phone without directly hooking into the line and things like that. So I'm sure that anybody that has an experience, a legitimate experience, is under the watchful eye of Big Brother, plain and simple.
Now, when was the last time you two had an actual abductee experience?
Well, for me, it was 1994, and that is what I'm writing about because I had another experience with the one, and so did Bob have an experience. So this is what we're writing about now, and hopefully it will help some people. I know I'm bringing in some things about the father, but I will not have it published if they remove certain things there because people have to know.
Now, do you think that's part of your mission with this whole thing, to get the information out there?
Because I heard the one tell me, I have chosen you to show the world. I didn't know what it was. I don't know what it is exactly today. But I went through another experience with the one, and therefore I'm trusting in what has been said to me and told to me and placed within me to do the work that I'm supposed to do.
No, and this is a little bit far out there of a question, but it's an intriguing one because a lot of folks like yourself that have come forward over the years with abduction stories, abduction scenarios, or information they've been given from the aliens or from the beings. In your case, light beings. A lot of these folks share this one common trait where they're given information that they have to give out to the public to make the world aware of the presence. Is there any other abductee that's come forward that you know of that share a similar story or a similar scenario with the same race of beings that we might know of?
Yeah, I've had some, there has been people contacting me at times for something like that, very similar. However, the thing is I try to stay away from the different encounters. I don't know very many people's encounters because Raymond Fowler told me not to get involved because what is happening to me, let it be what is happening, not being influenced by anybody else's experiences.
And another thing that makes
sense.
it difficult, there are a number of visitors. It's not just one group. And this confuses the issue because nobody knows exactly which group is following which scenario, so it makes it a little difficult.
Or which group is telling the truth
Right.
about what's going on and why they're even doing this.
Exactly. Even the government recognizes that there's more than one group, that there's several groups or more visiting. But of course, you'll never hear that.
You'll never hear that. I mean, look how long it's taken for the government to acknowledge that Area 51 even exists.
Oh, sure. And look at the people that have come forth, like Robert Salas, who was head of a nuclear missile group.
Who's going to be on this show, by the way, in next couple of weeks.
He's a great guy. He'll do a great show.
Very good.
And also, are you familiar with the Bentwaters case?
Of course.
England? Okay. Betty and I, believe it or not, were the ones that first interviewed Larry Warren.
Yeah.
And when he came to us, he heard us on a radio show or in a newspaper, and he came to us. He called me at work. He said, I had this experience while I was in the military, and he just had a tooth out. And, he didn't sound he didn't sound too cool when he talked to me. And I thought, oh, boy, this got to be a nutcase, because people had called our work asking if we had used UFOs and stuff like that. Well, anyway, I invited him to the house, and we sat down for hours, and he told us the whole story.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, it was just Betty and I realized that I didn't have the ability to bring this forth.
Right.
So I got in touch with Larry Fawcett, who was one of the founders of Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, because they had access to attorneys and whatnot. And that's how the story of Bentwaters was finally broken.
Yeah.
I also, at the time I talked to Larry, I filed on the Air Force, and I wrote the British Ministry of Defense. The Ministry of Defense said it was a hoax, it never happened. The Air Force said the same thing. And now look at today. You got the deputy base commander playing tapes that he recorded at the time. And by the way, after that, we were even more, I think, further removed from the government's Christmas list.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, if disclosure ever happens, I don't think they're going to have you at the front row there.
Yeah, not like
Incidentally, if you ever have a chance to have Larry Warren on, he's a very interesting guy to talk to.
Yeah, he's a nice guy.
Larry Warren, I'm going to put him on my list here to have him on. Speaking of disclosure, do you folks think that is ever going to happen? Full disclosure?
Yeah,
by
but
the
I
government?
don't believe it's going to happen by the government. I believe that it's going to happen because there will be no choice when there is an overwhelming number of sightings, and they are getting closer and closer and contacting more people.
My question is, there's so many races that are coming to Earth, so many different species. Why hasn't one landed somewhere in a city or the White House lawn or somewhere where it can't be disputed or denied that these things are real?
Well,
Why hasn't it happened yet?
We had our think tank go through the same scenario. If we went to another planet, how would we approach them? And they pretty much said the same thing, that they'd first be seen at a great distance, and then they'd come closer, finally contact a few people here and there before making an overt disclosure of themselves. And I think they're doing the same thing, it seems like it. The conditioning process.
That makes sense, but that's a long conditioning. We've been talking about hundreds
Well,
and hundreds of years.
in our life,
To a lot of people.
in our lifetime, it's a long time. In theirs, it may not be.
That's true. It depends on how you look at time itself, I guess. It's
Yeah,
relative to the species.
They have a totally different perspective of time than what we do. They can actually aren't on linear time like we are, because they can go back and forth in time, something we theoretically can accomplish but have not as yet.
Well, we're talking about the light beings, correct?
Well, no, these are the grays.
The gray
now,
beings, okay.
The grays,
The watchers.
as one of my abduction experiences in '67, one of those gray beings passed by me when I was on that table and literally turned to a being of light as he passed me. That freaked me out more than anything else that I saw in that place.
What do you think? How do you think that happened? I mean, do you think that they
Well,
have some ability to travel through space and time by becoming light beings, and then they can manifest back as grays?
Well, they could be from another dimension. You know, people, like when Betty said that she was taken through the door, a lot of people, well, how can that be? If you take a nail, a common nail, and apply ultra-high frequency sound to it, you can put it through a glass without cracking the glass. It's a vibratory rate. So, you know, if they come from a different dimension, I'm sure they can manipulate their vibratory rate. Everything, as you know, is made up of atoms, and the spaces between atoms, so nothing is solid.
That's very true.
It all depends how you look at it and how advanced their technology is. It's sure better than ours.
Well, you would hope so. They come from another galaxy somewhere. How much validity do you put to what we were talking about here before we had you on the show, where we read a story of how hostile they could be if we do make contact with a race of beings? And do you think they might be here to eat us at all? Because I mean, that's something that we talked about also. That what if we're their lunch sometime? And
well, Betty was told that there is one race that is hostile to man, but the other races will keep them at bay.
Oh, okay, good. So we have good aliens and we have the bad aliens.
Well, Larry Fawcett
Makes sense.
had actually, one of the reports he had was of UFOs that were in an area when a different type of craft approached and literally drove them off. And this is on record in his files. Larry, unfortunately, has passed away, but he was a police lieutenant and a very thorough investigator. And there are cases of UFOs engaging in battle with each other.
Huh.
And that's been way back, evidently.
Fascinating.
That has been going on.
Fascinating. Listen, we're almost out of time. We're running short here. Please give the audience your website again and how to get the books and how to contact you if they want to, book you for a show.
Oh, glad to. The website is the Andreassonaffair.com. The book that's been reprinted is available from Amazon.com. And on our website, on the home page, you will find Raymond Fowler, the author. Any of the other 5 books are available from Raymond. He has copies of the back issues. And as far as contacting for shows or anything, that's right on the media area of our website.
Robert,
Excellent.
Betty, you're fascinating individuals, and I'd love to have you both on. And hopefully we can have you back on in the future and talk some more.
Thank you so much. You guys are a lot of fun to talk to.
Yeah.
Believe me, we enjoy doing
Thank
your
you.
show. It's
was
been a lot
awesome.
of fun, really. But I ended up inside. There were your typical gray beings inside. They had on red uniforms, and there was a lightning bolt emblem on the left chest. I was put on a table, given a physical exam of sorts. They took skin samples, nail samples. They scanned me with something like an X-ray machine. They took sperm, and not in a very pleasant manner. Next thing I know, I'm in my car. I get to the beach, which was about a half-hour ride, and 2.5 to 3 hours had passed. So for years, I never knew where that time went. 1977, 10 years later, I met Betty.
So, real quick, not to cut you off before you continue. So, you had no conscious memory of that part of the abduction?
Not yet. I remembered
Not yet.
everything up to the red light.
Okay.
And that's
Continue.
where the rest came out under hypnosis with MUFON. 10 years later, I met Betty. Now, at the time that happened, I only told my parents and my best friend because I didn't want to end up in a mental institution. I thought Betty would be somebody I could talk to, so I had completed a trip around the country with a friend of mine, and we were coming home across the northern tier of the country, and all of a sudden we just decided at a rest area of going to Florida, which is several thousand miles out of our way. We got to Florida, meet my friend's sister-in-law who lived there. She told me about a woman she worked with that had a UFO experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I have to talk to her because I've kept this inside for so long. And it bothered me that part of my life was missing. I went down to talk to them, but obviously they had photo ID, and the people that I worked with had confirmed in writing that it was FBI people that were there. While we were there, I said, hey, why are you guys tapping our telephone? And they said, well, in your case, it's not us, it's Air Force intelligence.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So
Well, did you get that in
later-
writing?
Yeah, they don't put
Good
too
luck on
much
that,
in
Alan.
writing.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I tell you, we did have some fun with this because, Betty and I were not going to be intimidated. I called the CIA. I told them that we were doing a book on UFOs and I wanted an interview. They refused. I challenged the FBI to debate us on television, not about what happened to us, but about their own documents that I had in my possession. They would not. The administrator of NASA literally ran out of his office on us when we appeared there and asked for an interview because we were doing a book. And we were told at the guard station to walk down to where his office was, which was quite a walk from where we were. We got there, and he was in. We got there. We were told we would be granted an interview. We were met at the door by a visibly nervous secretary who said he was no longer in. I had called the Pentagon many times to try to find out whose helicopters were overflying our house.
What answers would they give you? I mean, if it kept happening over and over again.
Finally, they told me nobody there would talk to me. Now, the thing is, I recorded all these conversations. I still have them to this day on tape. But we had a little fun with this because these helicopters that would come over,
Welcome to Skywatchers Radio, Robert and Betty Luca. It's a pleasure to have you on here.
Oh, thank you so much for having us on.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Now, that was a brief summary
Short
of
synopsis.
your story. Yeah, a summary of your story. I want you really to tell the audience listening in the details of this because it is an amazing abduction scenario, abduction story.
I think Bob should really start with what's going on.
When did this start, Bob?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
When was this first started for you folks?
Okay, well, I'm going to go back even further. Actually, this all started for me in 1944. Okay, I was a child. It was during the war. I was living with my grandmother and my mom. My dad was overseas. I saw a light in the sky that came closer and closer to where I was on my swing set in the backyard. It turned out to be a craft which stopped above and to the left of my swing set. It emitted a very thin beam of white light, about the thickness of a pencil lead, which struck me in the forehead. I couldn't move. The craft, as it tilted, it had a domed glass top, and I could see what I called two little people inside at the time. Now, they gave me a message mentally, and they said they were preparing something that was going to be good for mankind, and that they had visited many, many people like myself who would meet in the future and not be fearful. That was the very first experience I had. There was residue left after the thing had left because they stopped. It was over a victory garden, and for years nothing would grow there. Okay, we move up to 1967. I was on my way to the beach, a beautiful, clear summer day. I go by an area known as the Trap Rock, and there's 5 men working on a railroad spur that went into that trap rock. They're looking up in the air, so I look up, and I see 2 huge cylinder-shaped objects that look like brightly polished chrome reflecting sunlight. I knew they were not aircraft immediately because there were no wings, no tail section, no exhaust, and no noise. I pulled my car over. I watched as from where I was, they were headed toward New Haven, Connecticut. I watched, and a few minutes went by, and 2 smaller objects dropped out of the belly, the center of these objects. One went toward New Haven, one went in the other direction. Okay. When they were out of sight, I resumed my trip to the beach. I got a couple miles down the road, very rural area, no houses. One of these craft came back. It stopped on the left-hand side of the road. It stopped several feet above the ground, and this is all conscious memory. Next thing I know, there's a blinding red light, something you could compare to like a ruby rod laser, very intense red light, and somehow I was inside that thing. I don't know actually what the process was. She wouldn't talk to me because Raymond Fowler told her beware of reporters and whatnot. So I finally convinced her to have lunch the next day, and that I was not a reporter. And from that time forward, I've been buying her lunch. Now, everyone
it turned out pretty well for you, though.
Yeah, it did. Now, a lot of people are aware of her story, but what happened was, once the first book came out which was almost totally about her experiences, the government unleashed on us. And when I say unleashed, we had three or four IRS audits in a row. Our telephone was tapped. Black unmarked helicopters overflew our house on a regular basis, and they showed up anywhere we went. They knew where we were. It didn't matter if we were in New Hampshire, Connecticut, Florida. They would show up. And our mail, any mail we got from out of the country was open. I did complain to the postmaster about that. So, and we were followed by cars that the license plates came back as unregistered. I gave the license plate numbers to Police Lieutenant Larry Fawcett, who was also a UFO investigator. And they came back as unissued plates. So, this is government interference. The FBI, when they showed up at my job, Betty and I had left in the middle of the night, went to Florida, didn't tell anybody, so they lost track of us. When we got back, the people at work told me what happened, so Betty and I went to the FBI office, and they said they could neither confirm nor deny that it was